which decisions that should be local are being made nationally or at state levels, far away from the people who actually understand the issue in the city. And you're going to hear that more and more, and I think you can see down the line the beginnings of an urban-rural agreement about the notion that maybe we should be pushing more resources back to cities and to communities of all kinds to make better decisions for themselves. So things I think we can agree on. Transportation needs are mostly local, which is why I'm not interested in national transit statistics. It's why I'm not interested even in a lot of regional transit statistics. I'm not interested in the average density of an urban region, because the density that matters is so localized right around transit lines. It becomes an easy proxy for stupid urban-rural culture wars. That will always happen, but there are ways for smart people to move beyond it in policymaking. Local regional government, I tend to find that we get the most done there. They tend to be less polarized, in part because they have to deliver on actual practical problems. And that leads to the idea that there probably is more of a future for flexible funding, that there probably is more of a promising future in which the federal government stops telling us how much money we can have for highways and how much money we can have for transit, and just tells communities, here's money for transportation. And here are a few things that capture the national interest, but mostly the national interest is for people to figure out for themselves what solves the problem of their own communities, urban or rural. I have a book too, by the way. It's by Island Press. Your favorite arrogant private monopoly will be happy to sell you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jarrett. Thank you, Randall. We're going to start Q&A, but Randall, first, I'd just see if there's anything that you wanted to respond to in Jarrett's presentation. Okay.
It's hard to argue with Jarrett because he does make a lot of good points. I have to say, though, that my fundamental point is I don't see why we're subsidizing transit. And his fundamental point is that transit is a local issue. Okay, let the locals decide how much they want to subsidize transit, but we don't need to have federal subsidies for it. His geometric arguments are good, except some of his photos, I think, are deceptive. Not necessarily his fault. He took some photos that are widely available on the web and put them up here. He showed you a picture of how many cars it takes to move so many people versus how many buses. The actual number was 60 people. And if you count, there are 60 cars, which means whoever took that picture was assuming there was one passenger per car, one person per car. If you look at the bus, it was one bus with 60 people, which means they assumed every seat was full and the aisles were full of standing people. Well, if we assumed all of those cars were full, and let's just say they're all 8-passenger minivans, we'd be talking about 7.5 minivans moving the same number of people as that car, or as that bus. On the other hand, if we assume that the cars were full to their average occupancy, which is about 1 2/3 people per car, they'd be about 40 cars, but the average occupancy of buses is 9. So it would take about 7 buses to move as many people as those 40 cars. So there's a little bit of deceptive reasoning there. I think driverless cars are going to solve some of these problems. Ultimately, if you want to solve congestion problems, transit isn't going to do it. Building more roads isn't going to do it. What's going to do it is road pricing, because roads have the peculiar property that when demand increases, the supply decreases. A freeway can move 2,000 vehicles, a freeway lane can move 2,000 vehicles an hour at speed. But when they get congested, they can only move 1,000 vehicles an hour. So you've lost half your capacity during congested periods. Road pricing can take care of that. Jared and I are both supporting Portland's efforts to do road pricing of Portland area freeways. That will take care of a lot of the problems. I want to mention one more thing, which is Jarrett talked about induced demand. I think induced demand is a good thing. It's a good thing if people are allowed more opportunities to take care of their economic and social and other business through better mobility. I think too many transit people are proud of the fact that they spend billions of dollars on transit projects that don't generate any new transportation. All they do is they shift people from low-cost cars into high-cost or low-cost buses into high-cost light rail trains. If you build a road and it induces new demand, you're generating new economic activity, and that's probably a good thing. Doesn't mean you should build bridges to nowhere, but it does mean that maybe some road construction might be better than building light rail lines that don't do anything except for capture people out who would otherwise take a bus.
Great. So just a couple reminders about Q&A that we'll open up.
about him?
Do I get a follow-up?
He wants to follow up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just hit 4 points, and it's just interesting how much Randall and I agree. My work is about helping transit agencies improve services quickly, and I tend to like to frame my work in terms of the specific goal of maximizing freedom. And I measure freedom by how many useful places you can get to in a reasonable amount of time. So I measure, for example, how many jobs can you get to in 30 minutes? It's called Marchetti's constant. It's a sort of been a typical acceptable commuting time across many periods of history. The reason I'm doing that is that I want to make transit systems useful for going more places so that you can do more things, so that you can have more freedom and opportunity in your life. I also do it that way because freedom is something I can measure geometrically, because I'm not predicting what you will do. I am simply trying to maximize what you can do. And one of my critiques of the notion of the triple bottom line, analyzing projects in terms of economic, environmental, and social impact, is that there is a 4th term missing. Those 3 terms all describe the results of a fundamentally managed society that is managed towards certain outcomes. The 4th term that's missing, and I'm always pointing this out, is freedom, which is none of those 3 things. It's the human sensation of having meaningful choices before you at every moment in your life and the opportunity to choose what you're going to do instead of being constrained by your circumstances. So I'm all about that, and I think that can be done with transit in dense cities in particular and in a lot of places. You'll notice that I am not defending many giant capital expenditures on transit. There are a number of major capital projects, transit projects in the United States that I am personally skeptical about. The particular last decade's fad for streetcars stuck in traffic, which you can all go experience on H Street, is something that I spoke out against very clearly and early, and you can find that on my blog. I'm really about using money efficiently, which is why I love buses. And I'm about efficiently creating lots of freedom, which is also a reason to love buses. It's also a reason to love rail where you really need rail. And there are places where you really need rail. Once you've built Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles or 2nd Avenue in New York City, you need rail. But particularly when you look at not just at what Wilshire Boulevard is, but what it wants to be. We agree about road pricing. I think you can get us to disagree about what to spend that on. And on the matter of vehicle occupancy, if you're going to look at vehicle occupancy, we don't have an average of 9 people on a bus. Well, that's, again, because only about half our bus service is trying to do better than that. Which is why I want to describe the geometry. Now, I will concede that diagram I showed you is idealistic, which probably means that you need a slightly higher density in order for that exact calculation to matter. But I want to finally say about minivans. Minivans, things like Chariots, are doing very well at rush hour, and that's great. Not everyone in the transit agency will tell you this, but I love it when transit loses a certain amount of peak direction ridership to rush hour, because pulling out a bus or train to work for just 2 hours is fantastically expensive. It's the most expensive thing transit agencies do. And so frequently, letting the private sector have more of that market, which is the only place minivans are achieving anything, can be okay. So I don't see Chariot as a competitor at all. I see that as a great way to optimize the total system. But I'm also very concerned about all-day, all-direction transit. I think that we're seeing, as cities grow denser, the commute declines as an overall share of the market, and the all-day, all-weekend grows. In Houston, we turned weekend service up to be exactly the same level as weekday. Imagine if you did that in this region. Think about all the people who work at McDonald's and who work at Target who have to be on the job on Saturday because that's all hands on deck. That's the busiest day of the week. We have to be there for them all the time. That makes an enormous difference, and we really see that. Those are some of my responses.
Thank you to both of you. Reminder for Q&A, please wait to be called on. We have a microphone going around. That'll help everyone in the room hear you, as well as those who are joining us on live stream. And if you could announce your name and affiliation as well. One other note, as Jared indicated at the beginning, we'd love it if you had some challenging questions. Maybe our more progressive friends want to ask Randall questions, and our more libertarian friends may want to ask Jared questions, so we can get a good dialogue going. And with that, we'll open it up. Yes, sir, right in front.
Two quick questions. There's Dan Lieberman, I'm a writer for Mr. O'Toole. You show that the use of personal transportation is a choice, but has that been imposed upon the public since 1920? All the infrastructure of the country, all the business arrangements, the design of the cities have been done with the use of cars rather than designed for public mass transportation. And the second question is, are there any statistics comparison to like countries like China, how their mass transportation compares to their personal transportation?
Well, it's interesting. Jarrett knows more about language than I do, but it's interesting how we use language. We've been talking about cars being imposed upon people, and I see cars as liberating people. In 1920, the average American traveled 1,200 miles a year by transit or by intercity rail, and about 800 miles of that was by transit. That's not very much travel, and it really was a lot of travel by a few wealthy people because transit was expensive, few well-off people, and not much travel by low-income people, which was about 70% of the people at that time. So cars became affordable to almost everybody. By 1926, half of American families had a car. By 1913, it was less than 4%. So cars became affordable, and people, because they had cars, were able to buy low-cost land in the urban fringe and build housing that was better housing than they had before. Because they had cars, they were able to travel to a wide